clock says maybe it's time to start. So we'll just start and what's cut here. E hono e kōri ki te apiru I mau ngā rongo ki te whenua I whakaaro whai ki ngā tangata katoa. I e tō mātai matu I turangi ana e no mātai I mui e koe, tīmatanga o tēnei hui, tuku atina whakamoi me tina whakapeta te kia koe mo tō āwhina mo tō manaki. I ringi hekingi a tātou I tēnei pō. Tuku ati tō wairu I waenui e mātou, whakamārama ki a mātou ngā tika me te pono o te kaupapa I mui e mātou ka kite a mātou te huarahi pai. Nō rere e te matu a kaharawa. Whakakaha I a rātou e kōrero ana ki a mātou I tēnei wā. A ka rongo ngā taringa, ka mōhiota ngā kau, he tika, kei te he rānei ngā kōrero. Nō rere e te matu a kaharawa, aroha mai ki tēnei inoa atu, I tangi atu ki a koe o te ingoa tapu, o tō tamatahi, I a mātou ariki o I rutu aitu. Kōri ki tō ingoa tapu.
Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi atu ki a koutou I tēnei pō, nau mai harawai. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Marie Slant. I'm also with Te Aitanga Mahake in Ngāri ki Kaiputahi. And tonight, this workshop was called to better educate our people, especially out in these regions where we've got oil companies coming out to the rural areas. To give us a bit of knowledge and understanding and in-depth management in a lot of these areas we're not yet familiar with. So this is Drew Hutton, and Drew is going to be giving us a presentation tonight, so that will help us make some better informed decisions in the near future. Kia ora, Drew.
Thank you very much. And thank you for turning up tonight to listen to me. I'd like to start by, if you don't mind, just do an Australian acknowledgement. I normally say in Australia at the start of a meeting, I acknowledge the traditional owners of this area, and I pay my respects to the elders of the community, and I thank them for looking after this land for so many generations. I am the president of an organisation in Australia called Lock Brigade, or the Lock Brigade Alliance. It's an alliance of about 160 community groups around the country, and we don't have too much oil in Australia. So my brief is not to take on the oil industry. The main things that are worrying us is that we've got a resources boom that's happening in Australia, happening around the world, but especially in Australia. And the mining industry generally has been in the more remote parts of the country. In my home state, which is Queensland, it's up in the north and western parts of the state, more remote, not so many people, certainly not very good farmland for the most part. And it hasn't been a huge problem. It has been for me because I'm an environmentalist, and I've been trying for 20 years to get the mining industry to have a bit better environmental management. Not very successfully. But nevertheless, most people haven't found the mining industry to be a huge problem. But with the resources boom and the greater demand for minerals, especially from China and India, a lot of the activity now is coming into the more settled areas and into good farmland where people live, and it's also we've got a whole new thing that's happening. So it's not just open cut coal mining that's coming into these areas, but a thing called coal seam gas, and you're going to get that here too. Coal seam gas, you've got to differentiate between what's called conventional gas. The coal seam is an aquifer. You'll have it'll be water all through there, and then there'll be maybe a surface aquifer here. Then our Great Artesian Basin, which covers about 1/5 of the continent of Australia, will have aquifers, further down, lower down. So what they do with coal seam gas is they drill from the surface down into a coal seam, like that, and they extract water from the coal seam, a very, very large amount of water. I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but 350,000 megalitres a year is what they're looking at in my state of Queensland. So that's a lot of water. And so they pull that up and bring it to the surface and put it in ponds. The water usually is fairly briny, salty, and contaminated with pollutants of one sort or another, although in various areas the water is good enough to have for stock water. So they feed the stock with it. But also, once you withdraw the water, you depressurise that aquifer, and that allows the gas to separate out from the water. So the gas then moves up that hill, and they put that off into a pipeline, and that goes off to a compressor station where it gets compressed and then piped. Now they need to put down wells into that coal seam, many wells. We're going to get something like 40,000 coal seam gas wells in Queensland. I think it's actually going to be more than that. It's going to be more like 80 to 100,000 gas wells. And the reason they need that is that the gas, what colour can I make the gas? I'll make it, no. It's not in a puddle. You don't put it down into a puddle. It's in little cleats and fissures and cracks in the coal seam itself. And so you extract the water. The gas then can free itself up from the water, and it starts floating around, and it could float to the wellhead. That's how they get it. Now, fracking. I think people get a little bit obsessed with fracking sometimes. It's a good word because you can tell people to frack off and all that sort of stuff. But it's used to free up the gas. So they'll pump down into the well, and usually they'll bend the well like that, the pipe like that. So they'll pump down millions of litres of water, as well as sand and little beads. The water is pumped down, under pressure to split open the coal seam. So it cracks it open. The sand is used to go in there and prop up those cracks and everything that are formed. And they also have quite a lot of chemicals, lubricants and biocides and things like that that protect the casings and stop the whole thing from just gelling up. So that allows the gas to flow more freely. About 40% of all coal seam gas wells are fracked in Australia. About 40%, not all of them.
At what depth? How deep is that coal seam?
It can be anywhere from just a few metres, really, about 50 metres, down to about 800 metres. When they do natural gas, the conventional gas, it'll go down, way down to about 2,000 metres, thereabouts. So there's another gas that they do called shale gas. It's not quite as far down. It goes down maybe to, it can go down about 2,000 metres too. Much the same as coal seam gas, except it's a lot lower. The lower it gets, the more difficult it is for the water to get contaminated with either gas or whatever, from down below. But still not impossible. The coal seam, however, is pretty close to the surface. Usually only a couple of hundred metres. That's what we're looking at. Now, most of the gas from Queensland is actually going to be exported, and so about over 90% of it. So they bring it to the surface, they take it to a compressor station. A compressor station would be twice the size of this building, and it's like a big jet engine. It makes an enormous noise. You can smell it from about 400 metres away. You can hear it from 10 kilometres away, and it compresses the gas, uses a lot of energy to compress the gas so it can be piped. And then it gets piped across country, about 400 kilometres up to a port called Gladstone. on the Queensland coast. And they're building at Gladstone a number of LNG, liquefied natural gas plants. So they freeze the gas and compress it even further so that it then gets put on tankers and exported. I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but at Gladstone, where they're liquefying that gas, they actually have to dredge the bay. Gladstone Harbour is right on the edge of the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area. And the dredging is the biggest dredging operation in Australian history, and about 60 million tonnes of spoil. And Gladstone's an old industrial city, so there's a lot of heavy metals and things like that in the sediment. The dredging has mobilised a lot of those heavy metals. They've come up into the water column and they've entered the food chain. And we've actually got an ecosystem collapse in Gladstone Harbour. We've got everything from molluscs and crustaceans at the bottom of the food chain through to the sharks have got these massive skin lesions all over them, and cancers and so on. And the whole fishing industry in the central coast of Queensland has collapsed. And UNESCO, the United Nations body that is in control of World Heritage listings, has said that unless the state and federal governments can have a management system that deals with this and stops it being such a problem, along with some coal ports, they're expanding our coal enormously. We're one of the biggest provincial coal exporters in the world in Queensland, and we're actually going to double that amount of coal that we're exporting. So we're building all these coal ports along the Great Barrier Reef. And so UNESCO has said if you don't fix up your management, you don't improve the situation, where we will look at putting the World Heritage Area of the Great Barrier Reef in danger. That's what they call it, in danger. And that will be a huge problem for us, because our tourism numbers have already dropped alarmingly because of the high Australian dollar. And they'll drop even further if the Great Barrier Reef is put in danger. There's about 63,000 people employed in tourism on the Great Barrier Reef, and that, the last thing you want is to have enormous number of job losses there. There's more people. There's 4 times as many people employed in tourism on the Great Barrier Reef as are employed in the whole coal mining industry in Australia. So it's good pay in the coal mining industry, but there's many more workers in the tourism industry. That's coal seam gas. It's huge. The 4 big projects in Queensland, and that's just in Queensland, the 4 big projects, they're largely foreign owned, over 80% foreign owned, and if you put them all together, it's the biggest project in Australian history by a long way. Huge. $80 billion worth of projects, and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of sales. Now, that would seem to be a huge bonanza for Australia, and in fact governments are saying just that. It's a huge bonanza for Australia. But if you look at it from, I'll come to the landowners in a minute, but if you're a small town in Australia, like my hometown is a little place called Chinchilla. Yeah, fine. Little town called Chinchilla, which is on the western Darling Downs. It's an agricultural area of Queensland, and my dad was the butcher there. Now, we've got we're starting to do some research in these areas, and it's coming up with some, I think, quite concerning information. In our mining towns, everyone thinks this is going to be a big bonanza, there's gold at the end of the rainbow, everybody's going to be rich. And some people do get rich, but it's only some people. most of the skilled workers come in from outside, sometimes from outside the country, a lot of the times from outside the country. In these towns, they mostly either fly in and fly out workers or drive in, drive out workers. They're not part of the community. And they're not part of the work community, and they're not part of their own home community. You know, they live this sort of twilight existence a lot. I don't think it's a terribly good lifestyle myself, but I mean, they make good money, I've got to say that. The survey work that's been done by my old university shows things like 60% of businesses in these towns say they're worse off after mining than they were before. 60%. You know, that's not a lot of businesses that are making money out of this mineral rush. The motel owner is making a lot of money. The pub's making money. And, you know, if you're a local transport company, for example, or a cleaning company, you might be making some money out of it. But the surveys are saying 75% of people in these towns are saying they're worse off after mining than they were before. The people are reporting, their perception is anyway, that violence is higher because, you know, it's a male society, you know, a lot of male-on-male violence and so on in these towns. Not a lot, but, you know, enough to be noticed by the local people. And so it's a mixed blessing. You know, some people are making a lot of money, but for example, if you run a mechanical workshop or a small manufacturing business in a town, all of a sudden you've got no skilled workers. They've all gone off to work for the mining industry, and that business closes. Rents go sky through the roof. A 3-bedroom home in my town of Chinchilla, you know, you could rent it for say $250 a week. You're paying $850 a week now for a 3-bedroom home. People are actually people who don't own their own homes but rent their places are living in tents on the showground. A lot of, you know, and that's a very common thing now. So if you take, you know, a little town like that and then expand it to the whole country, it's much the same. You know, it's just little towns, just a microcosms of the whole country. Some people are making a lot of money out of the mining boom. A lot more money is coming into the country than before, and you know, you've got to say, you know, that's good. But the advantages are not being felt everywhere, and in fact some sectors are really feeling the pinch. The manufacturing sector, because the mining boom has sent the Australian dollar through the roof, and the manufacturing sector is finding it very, very difficult to compete in the international market, and where the manufacturing sector is wobbling in Australia really badly, especially when they're exposed. Tourism is really exposed, and they're suffering at the present time. People are losing jobs, and they'll lose a lot more if the Great Barrier Reef is put in danger. Other sectors are having trouble as well. Agriculture, of course. Let me talk about landowners. Landowners in Australia, and the same thing in New Zealand, are faced with a situation where they do not own the minerals under the ground. The people own the minerals, as they do in New Zealand. And the state controls those minerals. They can privatise them by allowing a company access to them to exploit the minerals. And that includes gas, and it includes oil, and it includes everything.
Sorry, I just have to interrupt there. The people don't own the minerals in New Zealand. We own 6 foot under of the land, and the Crown own the rest. Okay. The government owns the minerals.
Okay. Well, in Australia, if you had a nugget of gold coming through the ground, even if it comes through the ground, the state would own it because it's the minerals. The state owns the minerals. But in order for a company to exploit those minerals, to extract them, they have to do an access and compensation agreement with the landowner. And that's Indigenous landowners as well as ordinary farmers and landowners. So, you know, they would have to sign what we call an Indigenous land use agreement with traditional owners in a certain area. They have to do the same only they call it access and compensation agreement with a landowner and a farmer. But the landowner can't refuse. The company, there's 20 days for negotiating the agreement. If after that minimum of 20 days there's still no agreement, the company can take you, the landowner, to compulsory mediation. If after another 20 days there's still no resolution, they can take you to the land court. In New South Wales it's called the Land and Environment Court. And 10 days after going to court, they can legally enter your property. Well, they can come regardless of what the court says. So the law is weighted entirely in favour of the mining industry. They do have to give you compensation, but what we've found a lot is that if you're a very canny person and you've got some good lawyers, you can probably get a pretty good compensation agreement. Most people get screwed, badly screwed, in fact. And the poorer you are, the less able you are to get legal assistance and so on, the more likely you are to be completely swindled by these companies. The other thing that happened was that they had governments on their side. And I tell you that, it doesn't matter who's in government, they got them on their side. Right? When this industry came into Queensland, and the same with New South Wales, the first thing they did was to single out the key political people and their staffers. Then they looked at the bureaucrats, and they see what they can offer is if you want to go out of politics, or if you don't win the next election, or you're retiring from politics, you go and work for one of these companies for 2 or 3 times the salary that you were previously being paid, and then you become a person of influence because you have influence back in your old party. The same with bureaucrats. The head of our EPA in Queensland went off to work for one of the companies for 2 to 3 times his salary. The head of our regulatory agency went off to work for Santos at 2 or 3 times his salary. They bought the key people, including scientists. The Centre for Coal Seam Gas was set up at the University of Queensland. The head of that is a guy who's on every panel and every expert committee going. His Centre for Coal Seam Gas is 3/4 paid for by the coal seam gas industry, and the coal seam gas industry can dictate 100% of the research priorities of that research body. And that's a very, the industry controls the research. There's very little independent capacity out there to say, okay, let's go to this person and get an independent assessment of just what the impacts are likely to be. Very difficult. You really do have to look for somebody who genuinely is independent and doesn't do business with the company. And in my state, we don't know what conflict of interest means, I'm afraid. Now, I went west. Just to add one more point to that, there's a thing called the precautionary principle. It's supposed to underlie all major development decisions in most countries. Certainly New Zealand, certainly Australia, we have it. An environmental impact assessment is supposed to be the way in which you guarantee that the precautionary principle will apply. With these proposals, governments just push them through. The people who were supposedly, the public servants who are supposedly assessing these projects, had no time to do it properly, no resources, just got rammed through. They have our regulatory body, which is supposed to have dozens of people working for it. You know how many people work for it monitoring this industry? 2. With 2 people now who work for it. So they're under-resourced. All the skilled people have gone off to work for the industry. There's no oversight by government. It's a purely self-regulated industry that has never been properly, whose project has never been properly assessed. There is no solid scientific basis for knowing what the impacts are likely to be. And governments recognise this. They have said to the industry, we don't really know what the impacts are going to be, but what we're asking you to do is work it out as you go. If you make mistakes, let us know and we'll adjust the regulatory system so that we accommodate you. It's called adaptive management. We actually call it the suck it and see approach. But it's the same thing. It means if you mess up and have an accident, well, we'll just simply accommodate you.
Drew,
Yeah.
just before we go on, I just want to ask a question that might be specific to a lot of our iwi groups that deal with, are currently dealing with certain issues, is that how and at what stage are Aboriginal values and cultural concerns taken into consideration? Because we're dealing with two different forms of legislation with New Zealand and Australia. We deal with our own Minerals Act in most areas, but in this particular case, at what stage were Aboriginals actually engaged in terms of their cultural values? And what took place for that to change?
Okay. In Australia, if a company wants to do something like this, they need to sign what we call an ILUA, an Indigenous Land Use Agreement with the traditional owners of the area. But what they, and that's the equivalent, if you like, of an access agreement with a farmer. So they need to do this with Indigenous groups. Most of these companies are actually coming onto fairly closely settled areas and long settled areas, they don't tend to be covered by land councils or by some of the more established land councils which are in the more remote areas and better resourced land councils. So they're fairly disparate concentrations of Indigenous populations. And look, you've got to give it to these companies, they are very good at splitting people. It's incredible. I mean, they do it to whites, they do it to Indigenous people. They come in, they can divide a community just like that. They'll go for people who they think will talk to them and negotiate with them and do a deal, and they'll marginalise people who won't, or who put up an opposing view. So a friend of mine is a traditional owner in my area around Chinchilla, and he the company, which is called QGC, did an ILUA with the group there, doing the traditional thing, talking to those they could talk to and marginalising those like Neil who had concerns about it. And so it went through, but then a year or two later they just bulldozed this whole sacred site. They just put a bulldozer, I mean, I don't think they did it purposely, but it went straight through. And building a pipeline corridor. They knew, they should have known it was there, they should have gone around it, but they went through. And Neil kicked up a fuss about it. And, I mean, that just split that community apart. And his family, his own family, they were having screaming matches at each other, and they were telling me he was crazy, and I mean, it's just awful to see, it really was. Other areas where ILUAs have been signed, there's an area further south, close to the border, the federal court actually threw it out, because simply for that same reason, that the company talked to some groups, wouldn't talk to others. That's the history of it, I'm afraid. It's, what we're talking about is smaller Aboriginal populations in the areas where they're going, and not as well organised. So, it's not comparable with what you've got here, where Maori populations are stronger and bigger and probably better organised.
Yeah, but they still face the same kind of difficulties in finding independent specialists to advise them, and also for our people to have the right resources and funding to actually allow us to get an independent person in, aside from these companies, to actually give us a good example of what can and cannot happen that is likely to actually have some kind of impact on our cultural values. And in some instances, if I'm not wrong, That's not taken into consideration in many areas.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with gas or oil exploratory
That doesn't surprise me at all.
companies.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to find independent SFE anywhere in the world on this subject.
Well, with resource companies especially. I mean, I spend a fair bit of time trying to find independent scientists because I need to see with fracking, you know, you'll get these people like it happened with me on radio. I got off the plane, almost went straight to radio.
9 to noon.
What was it?
9 to noon.
No,
National Radio.
9 to noon on National New Zealand Radio, and the woman there said the usual thing that these companies say: there is no evidence to suggest that fracking contaminates water. There is no evidence. Well, there's no evidence available to suggest. Well, in fact, that's not entirely true either. But you know, the companies are the main ones who've got they've got the knowledge, because they're the ones who've got the expertise and the access to be able to find this out. There actually is evidence that fracking causes contamination of water, and there's plenty, you know, not plenty of it, but a growing body of information. And I'll mention a couple so that you can look them up. But the US EPA has done a study that's found in Pennsylvania, in Wyoming, that there have been fracking which has led to water contamination in various instances. The Duke University, which is a very prestigious university in North America, has done studies which show that while they haven't been conclusively able to show instances where contamination has led to this water contamination, fracking has led to this water contamination, they have shown that the pathways exist, and many of them do exist, for the water to be contaminated by the fracking. So if you've got a pathway, believe me, you're going to get contamination. So, you know, there's two very prestigious pieces of research. This is the US EPA we're talking about, and Duke University, that say, yes, fracking can lead to contamination, and does lead to contamination. And the other, I'd recommend you go onto the website for the Natural Resources Defence Centre in the United States, and they've got, on their website, you will find dozens, if not hundreds, of case studies where fracking has occurred and the next day people's wells or their water has been contaminated.
I think the concern in a lot of areas is that we may be focused on just fracking in terms of the chemicals that are used in the process and the shale that is interrupted, but what also would concern, or should concern, a lot of those Indigenous groups is the practices in which are used by companies to actually access those areas. And I'll give an example. For instance, if you've got a lot of machinery or moving across the land, at some stage it's going to have an impact on the land area of which it's moving across. You're also looking at the hazards that are involved in the chemicals that are used, how they're kept, why they're kept, what time they're moved, and any introduction of new species on those new machinery that are brought into the country from outside. So it's more than just fracking.
Absolutely.
And I pretty well much think that that's what we've been, a lot of the advertising focuses on, but there's a bigger picture that impacts on the Indigenous issues.
And impacts on all issues. They're not just fracking. You're absolutely right. There's with farming, you know, especially, and you can go and put these wells down if you've got one of those huge cattle holdings, you know, out west in Queensland, you know, 50,000 acres or whatever, you know. You can put a few wells out there and you wouldn't even know they were there, unless they took your water, then you know. But if you've got crops, and friends of mine have got a farm in this beautiful, the soil is just magnificent, it grows anything. And you go putting, for example, salt, and you bring up a lot of salt, millions of tonnes of salt will come to the surface, they don't know what to do with it. Any salt goes on that black clay soil, and bang, that's it, nothing grows. If you disturb that land with pipelines and corridors and trucks and all the rest of it, and wells, that's it, you can't farm it. You know, and it erodes as well. So, you know, I mean, that's just one example. There are many, many examples like that of where if you just look at a gas well, it's that big. It's just a little bit of a thing in the ground. It's got a pad, you know, which starts out about 70 metres by 70 metres. Comes down to about 10 metres by 10 metres after a while. It doesn't look like anything. But, you know, you get up in a helicopter above a gas field and look down, which I've done, and we've got a beautiful photograph, by the way. If you go on YouTube, you look for chinchilla or just images, Google images, chinchilla 2010, and you'll see where I come from and see what it looks like. You go down below and it looks like a pincushion, you know, with all these gas wells, dozens and dozens of them in just a very small area, all connected by roads and pipelines, and it just looks like a pincushion.
So what sort of distance apart are you talking about?
750 metres.
750 metres.
That's the usual distance. Sometimes they'll put multiple wells on the same pad, but usually they don't. They just put one well per pad. But they can bring it down to 400, by the way. And so that's why I'm saying we could see 80,000, not 40,000 gas wells after a couple of decades.
With the oil drilling here, because oil is what they're going for, obviously, it's the new technology means they can do one pad, like they're building up here now, 90 metres by 90 metres, and they can have 16 holes on that one pad, up to 18, some people reckon, but 16 is the common sort of maximum for a 90 by 90 sort of measurement.
Sorry.
Yeah, you go.
I mean, I think you've had it at Taranaki for years. What's different about what's happening now is, first of all, the scale. You know, it's been pretty small when it's been conventional gas. Now you're going to get all that coming out of that fairly small contained area, and it's going to come across areas that has never ever before seen major resource extraction activities. And it's going to be coming into areas where land use has been entirely different. And incompatible, I think, in many cases, with this sort of extraction activity. So, and we've got this new thing called coal seam gas. It's new. Don't let anyone tell you that they've been doing this for years up in Taranaki. They have not. It's extraction into the coal seam with many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of wells across the countryside, and extracting large amounts of water, and then you've got all the problems of environmental management, knowing how to deal with that, and then all the social issues that come with the introduction of a whole new sort of activity, whole new groups of people, that coming into an area and really causing quite severe dislocation.
Drew, if I can just interrupt in there. Just in terms of the water that comes back up from the Colosseums, the water, where's that going?
Good question. Back into the streams, in the surface streams for the most part. What they started out doing was using it for dust suppression and sometimes for irrigation with salt-tolerant trees and stuff. It's a very salty stuff, and it's likely to have other stuff in it as well. A little place called Tara. I actually got involved because I went out to Tara. There's people out there, they're called blockies. In Tara, a blockie is someone who lives on a small block. And these are poor people usually, and they've just got a few acres out there in country that's not very productive country, but they like to live out in the bush, and they like to be away from the city and away from people, and they don't want to be disturbed. They've got their solar panel on the roof and their rainwater tank, and they home study the kids, and they just love being out there in the bush. Well, they've got a gas field coming at them, and they don't like it one little bit. Where was I going with all of this?
Where's the water going?
Tara.
Oh, the water. Thank you. I might ask you that. I'm getting really tired. So I might need you to prompt me. They got really upset because the company actually just, instead of just putting this water in a pond, or the ponds were getting full, I suppose, they went out on the roads and just let it go. Megalitres of it. And it was running down the gutters and into people's dams and down the creeks. And kids who were going and splashing in the water or swimming in the dams were coming out with blisters and burns all over them. And they were really angry about this. And so, in fact, the whole opposition to coal seam gas began with the blockies, and who were so upset they were treated with complete contempt by these are blockies. Why should we worry about them? And they got me involved. I heard that they were protesting, and I rang them up and I said, "Oh, I'd like to come out and hear what you've got to say." And they sat me on the back veranda there and took me to it. And at one stage, they brought it. They're on this rural residential estate. It'd be somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people living there. Quite a lot of people. And they're on about 30-acre blocks, so pretty small. And he brought out the map of the estate, and then superimposed all the gas wells that they were going to build on it. And there were hundreds of them across this relatively small area. I said, that can't be right. That's what the company gave. Well, you can't live in that. You can't live like that. You can't live with gas wells all around you. Every gas well leaks, by the way. Every pipeline leaks. It all leaks. So you live with gas. And so, that got me into it. And I was hooked. But then I just went from farmhouse to farmhouse basically after that, and asked people what was going on. And I'm a greenie, and I'm well known as an environmentalist in Australia. So farmers weren't all that fussed about me, but they saw that it was to their advantage to make alliances, and we built up a really strong alliance now out of those early beginnings. I worked with the farmers groups. I helped them to set up groups. I helped them to get media. We got an enormous amount of media focus on it, on the issue, and but we started too late. And by August of 2010, 3 out of the 4 big projects had got their approval. So I said I called all the farmers together, all the farmers groups together in my office out on the Darling Downs, and said, well, we've got 2 options. We either can't, we recognise we can't do anything about this and roll over, try to get the best deal we can, or we fight. And if we fight, we're going to push them back and push them back, push them back, until we get them out of areas they shouldn't be in, and keep them under control. And we don't let them go into any new areas. So people, and I suggested we have a campaign called Shut the Gate, where we refuse to negotiate access, because the company still had a lot of access agreements they could get, refuse to negotiate access, and call on all landowners to do the same. And I said, shut the gate. And one of the farmers said, hang on, everyone in the country shuts the gate, you just open it again. We've got to lock the gate. It became the Lock the Gate campaign, and then soon after that it spread to New South Wales, because they were getting the impacts of this resources boom, including coal seam gas. And they had a meeting down south that I didn't go to think about setting up a national alliance. Well, I should have gone to it, because in my absence I was put on the committee. And then, anyway, we had a meeting, and I figured, the person who becomes president has got a lot of work to do, and the secretary will have a lot of work to do, and the treasurer will have a lot of work to do. So I'll be the vice president. They don't have anything to do. So that was my theory. But then the president resigned after a month, and I became the president. So, but I worked on the basis that we could only, you'd never negotiate from a position of weakness. That's my number one rule in life. Never negotiate from a position of weakness. Try to get into a position of strength. The only way that we could get into a position of strength was through people power. It's all we had. We had governments against us, the companies that are biggest in the world, people getting bought off one way or another. So we had to mobilise the support of the community, and especially with landowners, and then use that leverage that we could get that way to negotiate a far better agreement on this. We're not opposed. I'm not opposed to mining, and Lock the Gate not even opposed to coal seam gas. But we do say you have to protect good farmland. You have to protect our vulnerable underground water system, in the driest continent on earth especially. You have to protect our sensitive environmental areas. You have to protect closely settled areas, and you have to protect cultural heritage. All of those things have to be protections that are built in before these industries are allowed to go rampant across the countryside. So if governments are prepared to do those things, then fine. But there's probably a couple of other things that we need, a bit of environmental law reform, give people more say in these decisions and more appeal rights. But otherwise, they're the key things that you need to do. You need to say, if you've got really good farmland, you need to say, well, you can't put high impact activity in that.
Yeah, Drew, with everything against you, are you winning?
Sorry?
Are you winning with everything against you?
Yeah, we are, it's been remarkable, absolutely remarkable. We've got people who've been traditional enemies for years and years in Australia now working together. We've got the most conservative people in the country, farmers, National Party members, voters. They're very conservative people. They've never broken the law in their lives. They're polite, they're respectable, all of those things. They're now blockading these companies. And we've got 71-year-old grandmothers. We've got one now, just outside Newcastle, who's locked herself onto a tractor in front of the gates in this place where they're trying to bring the drill rigs in. And we've got something like somewhere between 10 and 20,000 landowners in New South Wales who've locked their gates. Between 10 and 20,000. We've got 2,000 in Queensland who've done the same. Even in Queensland, where they've made such inroads, and they're already having massive impacts, by the way, I haven't gone into that, the land access agreements, they still need a couple of thousand of them, and it's slowed. They got 50 last year, 50 in the last 12 months in the whole state. So it's slowed to an absolute trickle, and they're desperate. With the fourth big project in Queensland, which is owned by 50% by Shell, 50% by PetroChina, a company called Arrow, they're going to fall over. They can't get on the land. We've locked them out.
But I thought you said that they could get on after the next court, so...
Not if we lock the gate.
Oh, I see.
See, we've locked the gate, and we've said to them, we're not negotiating access with you. And even no matter what the law says, they know that if they use that law, if they take one of the landowners to land court, there's two things might happen. One is that the court actually might find in favour of the landowner, and that would be a precedent, and that would just immediately grind their operations to a halt. Or, and what's more likely, is if they go arresting a farmer or his wife, standing at the gate of this property. So if a multinational mining company calls in Australian police to arrest an Australian landowner at the front of their gates, with a maximum $50,000 fine, by the way, I've been arrested under that, so I know, the people of Australia will just rebel. They're not going to accept that. They'll be outraged by it. And these companies know it. They haven't taken one landowner to land court. Not anywhere in Australia. And we have called their bluff, and they don't know what to do. It's a Gandhian campaign. You know, Gandhi brought down the British Empire. We're going to bring down these companies. Well, I mean, I don't want to bring them down. I want them to be so desperate that they'll say, look, we'll talk to the community and we'll work out a just and sensible and rational way of doing this so that all the best protections are in place before we go ahead. I don't care about government. If government's not going to come with us, then they can go down to the next election, because we're building the biggest social movement in Australian history here. It's going to have more people than we've ever seen before in a social movement. And because what it is, it's about the future of the country. You know, it's not just about a few landowners, and it's not even necessarily about rural Australia. It's about the future of the country. This is the last few decades of the fossil fuel era. You know, regardless of what we do, it's not going to go on for much longer, because we just simply won't have the resources to keep it going. I mean, we're going to have coal, we're going to have gas and so on for quite a while yet, but it's not going to be able to go on for much longer. So but before it goes, these people are going to, this industry is going to lash out, and it's going to take whole regions with it. So what we want to do is implement the protections now. Make sure that they're there so that this resources boom can go ahead, but it goes ahead while the key things that our society believes are important are protected. And that's what I say not only to rural Australians but to urban Australians as well. If you love your country, if you love the landscape and the landforms and and the cultural heritage and all of those sorts of things, if you think these things are worth protecting, then you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to get together with other Australians and say, look, we're calling a halt. We're putting a spear in the ground. That's what I like to use that analogy, because even though it's a completely non-violent campaign, you put the spear in the ground and say, we're making a stand. And you'd be surprised how many people come around you. I've been to places where I've said to them, how much support you got in the community? Oh, not much. Everybody loves mining here. And then a couple of months later, this is a little place called Gloucester. A couple of months later, out of desperation, they blockaded the company trying to bring drill rigs in. The next minute, they're inundated with support from the community. Hundreds of people coming in to support them. They didn't realise it, but there's hundreds of people out there who thought the same way they did. They just needed some people to put the spear in the ground and say, this is not right. And that's what we're finding, that people are coming to us in large numbers. Even the police who arrest people like me are saying, come on mate, time to go. I agree with you, by the way. I got asked by the fellow who arrested me out of Tara, I got asked to come and be the guest speaker at his bowls club. People know in their hearts this is wrong, and they know that they work it out after they get it, that just depending on governments to do the right thing is not going to work. It's only people power mobilising and saying to governments, you do the right thing, or we're just simply going to lock the gate. And if necessary, we'll block the gate.
Drew, you said that agriculture's in dire straits with the high Australian dollar. So what's happening to the desperate farmers who open the gates, just for financial reasons?
Look, I really feel for a lot of those, especially the ones who did deals back in the mid-2000s. There's quite a few. Most of them were done between 2005 and 2009. We were having a drought, a big drought in those years, and people were pretty desperate. It's not an easy life in the country, in Australia. There's a lot of suicides amongst, especially men, in the bush, and young men too, quite often. It's one of those sort of hidden tragedies that go on. So when these companies first turned up, offering this money and saying things like, "You'll hardly even know we were here," which is nonsense, they thought, "Oh, well, okay, this might be a way to see me through the tough times." But the payments are next to nothing. They were in the early days, at least. I've met people who got as little as $250 a well. $250 a well. And by the way, a well isn't just a well. It's a pipeline corridor and a road corridor. And they trash your property. And they come in all hours of the day and night. You don't know when they're on, when they're off, when they're working on the well site. Everything's lit up, like in the middle of Brisbane. So you can get up to $10,000 a well. But the price you pay for that is you lose control of your property. And if you're very unlucky, you might lose your water. And like friends of mine have got a cattle feedlot out near Chinchilla. They've got 3,000 head of cattle. They have to, I can't remember how many megalitres, I think they use 2 megalitres of water a day to water those cattle. Now, they're on a bore. Actually, they've got a couple of bores. That's where they get their water from. If those bores go, and they will go, by the way, everyone knows that water's going to go. So they'll lose their water at some stage, and there's 3,000 head of cattle that have to have water. So you can't just simply truck water in for 3,000 head of cattle. They're in big trouble. They know they're in big trouble.
How do you know the bores will go?
Because they're right in the middle of the epicentre of the coal seam gas activity. And if you take my funny diagram here, can you understand this diagram, by the way? Make sense to you? See, each of these aquifers looks as though it's just a hermetically sealed container. Well, it's not. There's always interconnectivity between them. Fissures and cracks and everything like that. And normally, that doesn't matter. The system's under pressure and it's a stable system. But you depressurise this whole level by taking water out. You've got an area of low pressure here, areas of high pressure down here, and gravity, of course, here operating. And the water all of a sudden starts moving into the area of low pressure. So down it goes, and up it goes. And so this will be water first of all. They'll lose their water there first of all. But then they'll start, if they've got bores down into these aquifers, they'll lose that too. And we know that. That's all been worked out and modelled. I mean, the companies try to say it'll be next to nothing, it won't be very much, it'll only go down 150 metres. And that'll be 150 and that'll be 60. But it does mean that you'll have to get a new bore or drill your bore down a lot deeper. That all takes a lot of money and it takes time. And in some cases it won't be possible. And we know that from the modelling and the work that's been done. Even the companies themselves have did that.
So they showed that example on Gas Rush, didn't they? Is that right?
They're the people I was just referring to, Scott and Katie. But they're that's many times over. You can find that. A lot of the people who signed agreements early on, a lot of them are friends of mine, and they don't like talking to me. And it's not because they think I'm evil or anything, or that they've done the right thing. They're just embarrassed. They were naive, and they were bluffed by these companies, thinking they're so big and powerful, there's nothing we can do about it. And the other thing is, you can't sell your property. If you've got gas on it, you can't sell it. There hasn't been a property with gas on it sell in the whole Surat Basin, which is a huge area of Queensland, in 2 years.
No one wants to buy it.
No one wants to buy it. They don't want to buy into trouble, you see. And that's a tragedy, because a lot of these farmers are old people. The farmers tend to be older, and a lot of them don't have kids that are coming through to take the property on, and so they're seeing their property as their superannuation. they want to sell it, you know, as they get old, and move to a centre where there's health services, especially. And they can't do it. They're stuck with this property. So they either walk off the property, or they, if they want to go and live closer to the health services, or they stay on the property and take the consequences of that. It's really quite tragic. I get very upset by it. Any other questions?
Earlier, we were talking, well, when silos off, we had all the water that gets sucked out of the ground and put in these ponds. Sort of, how big are the ponds, and B, they can't leave the water there forever. Something must be done.
Well, that's what they originally were going to do. They were originally going to just leave it there forever and evaporate it off. But the two things, the government said they couldn't do that after a while, but secondly, they just ran out of places to put the water. So they had to do something about it. And that's where they tried flushing it, you know, watering the roads and stuff. That didn't do the trick. So now they're putting it through reverse osmosis and purifying it to a certain level, and then getting the government through this adaptive management, suck it and see approach, to dump it into local streams. Which is, and you know, at some level that's okay, but what's happening is that these ephemeral streams in Australia, you know, if you're in the bush, if you're west of the Great Dividing Range, you don't have running water for most of the year. You've got water holes most of the year, and just for a month or two you've got running water. So you're turning what's an ephemeral stream into a permanent waterway with this, because they're just pouring it into the stream and it flows down until it hits a weir. That's one thing that they're doing. What else are they doing? They are still continuing to water salt-tolerant trees. They're growing all these plantations of trees that they'll never use. What else? Yeah, they're the main things that they're doing with it. Yeah. But just they're sticking it wherever they can.
The main thing was, like here, they proposed to actually, the water they call produced water, which is, they keep something like 60 to 70% in the ground, and the other percentage, Taranaki has agreed to take it, so they put it into tankers and they drive it across the country to Taranaki, and because Taranaki is the only place in New Zealand that allows them, is given permission for them to dump it there, and the produced water is toxic, and that's why they're not allowed to dump it here because there's nowhere to dump it, and so somebody in Taranaki has been generous enough to say, but then the issue is, what about if the truck crashes or falls into the Waireka Gorge river, or has an accident along the way, and they say, well, it'll never happen. That's what they said about the Titanic, it wasn't going to ever sink. So that's kind of, those are some of the things that...
there's something worth mentioning there too, is that everyone knows there's chemicals in the cocktail. A lot of it is not, it's like foodware. It doesn't have, they have tiny fractions of chemicals in them, but it's the cumulative effects of these things that we're worried about, right? And we're going to be, nearly all of this stuff, this chemical, is going to be coming offshore, and it's staying here forever. It comes here and it stays here. So as this industry grows, thousands and thousands of barrels of the stuff, whatever it is, I don't know, is coming here and it's staying here, and just that is a good thing to think about, because ethically, you know, it should be leaving, it should be going back where it came from.
The issue too, Joss, is the fact that we don't know exactly what type of chemicals they are using.
We can, by law, we can find out, but it's a struggle to find out.
Exactly. I mean, it's the legislative protocols that allow us to have that information, their concerns. A lot of people out of the wider community that are in particular going to be subjected to any possible hazards.
Yeah, there's lots of... I don't know if you guys saw, but recently two stream was damaged in Southland, well, a long time ago from fracking, and it was only just disclosed recently. So, I mean, I can send that report to you.
Yeah, Richard. A couple of questions, Greg. Sorry. You know, it goes back to the old scenario that the almighty dollar talks, isn't it? In regards to the government and these big companies. There are a couple of places up here, as everybody knows, that are looking at it. One of the farmers, I mean, you're talking about lock the gate. Well, obviously somebody's opened the gate locally. What can we do?
Well, yeah, this is a...
Depends on how passionate you are, really.
Yeah.
If you're really serious about it, I mean, you can lock the bridge.
Well,
there's 2 bridges you can lock.
We've confronted this in Australia, and we don't take the view that property rights are absolute. We say that if there's one person in the community who lets them on, and the rest of the community doesn't want it, that one person letting them on is actually endangering the rest of the community. I mean, if it was for a coal mine, for example, the person who lets them on sells their property for a massive amount, then the worst place to be is the neighbour, who cops all the dust and the same with coal seam gas. Somebody comes on, lets them on, everyone else loses their water. So it's a community issue, not just an individual issue. So there's a real issue there about to what extent does the community have rights, to what extent does the individual have rights in this issue. And we resolve that by saying where the community feels that they've got, most people in the community have a position that they don't want this industry in there, then they have a right to blockade.
I think we've got to be very careful too. The community of Salem had the same attitude, didn't
Sure.
they?
Yes.
And we learned from history that hundreds of people were hung and burnt at the stake because the community thought they were dangerous.
Well,
so I think we've got to, and this is what I'm saying is we.
They can do about it. They can try taking people to court. They try that. They're in such deep trouble. They're really in deep trouble if they do that. So just remind yourself, on a daily basis, we're the ones with the power. We're in control. They're not.
And it can work. I'm driving through here today and I felt like I'm putting all these hours into this just for my kids,